Okay, should we go ahead and get started?
Go ahead.
All right. Well, I want to welcome everybody and thank you for joining us for tonight's Do Good Fun virtual salon, which we are offering in conjunction with our current exhibition, Perdido, which is work by Richard McCabe, and we'll be showing in the Do Good Gallery here in Columbus until August 3rd. My name is Hallie Fivecoat, and I'm the collection manager here at the Do Good Fund, which is a Southern photography collection based in Columbus, Georgia. I am pleased to welcome our guest speakers for the evening, Jimmy Nicholson and Richard McCabe. Jimmy, who is joining us tonight from his home in Quincy, Florida, is going to lead the conversation. Jimmy is a great friend to the Do Good Fund, and his work became part of the permanent collection in 2020. Thanks to what I understand was a fortuitous introduction by his daughter, Allison. We're grateful for your time tonight.
Thank you.
Just a little more about him. Originally from Bainbridge, Georgia, Jimmy Nicholson counts his formal photographic training as a single photography class at Florida State. Jimmy was subsequently mentored by photographer and fellow member of our collection, Paul Kwileski. His body of work consists of two distinct periods. From 1974 to 1982, he traveled the roads of North Florida, Southwest Georgia, and to a lesser extent, Southeast Alabama, all land bound by the Flint, Chattahoochee, and Apalachicola rivers, in search of his subjects. In 2013, he started producing work again, focusing on documenting life along the forgotten coast of North Florida, a section of coastline stretching from Mexico Beach to Carabel. More recently, he's been documenting migrant workers in the tomato fields and forests of Gadsden County. You could say Jimmy is a true follower of the road less traveled. And if you aren't familiar with his work, which I think most of you are, but you can look him up on the Do Good website. But you should also be sure to follow him on Instagram, where he thoughtfully shares his work. It's a great way to see and get lost in his photography. And clearly from all of that, Jimmy is very well qualified to talk about the work we'll be exploring in tonight's conversation, which is a body of work centered on the lost Florida Gulf Coast by New Orleans-based artist, writer, and curator Richard McCabe, who's joining us from his offices at the Ogden Museum for Southern Art. I want to turn this over, but now one thing before I do, let's see, I've got, I just want to let you know that we'll be taking time to answer any questions, so please feel free to type your questions in the chat feature. And now I will hand things off to you, Jimmy, to introduce Richard and start tonight's conversation.
Thank you, Haley, and for that wonderful introduction. I do appreciate it. Welcome, everyone. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce a fellow Florida photographer, Richard McCabe. Some of you may know that Richard was born in England and he grew up in the American South. His photo projects, Landstar and Roadside Ruins, both deal with documenting the disappearing vernacular signage and structures that live along southern back roads. And since 2011, he's been the curator of photography at the Ogden Museum of Southern Art in New Orleans. He's organized and curated over 40 exhibitions, including The Mythology of Florida, Eudora Welty, photographs from the 1930s and 40s, self-processing instant photography, Memory as a Strange Bell, The Art of William Christenberry, and New Southern Photography. And Richard's own photographs have been included in gallery and museum exhibitions across the United States at institutions like the Pensacola Museum of Art in Pensacola, the Mobile Museum of Art in Mobile, the A.M. Richard Fine Art Gallery in New York, and the Boyd Salolite Gallery in New Orleans, as well as the Pensacola Museum of Art and the Little Shotgun House in New Orleans, to name a few. And so welcome, Richard. It's exciting to see you on the internet, and I hope that I'll have some questions that you'll find of interest. And so with that in mind, let me go to the next slide. Okay. Did that show? Or are we looking at the...
I'm not seeing anything.
Okay. Sorry for this technical glitch. Let me see. There we go. The new share. Okay. Okay, how about there? You seeing it now?
Yep.
Perfect. All right, so let me go to the first slide that I want to talk to you about. Your project Landstar, which you published as a monograph in 2017, was in part inspired by road trips you took with your dad. And so what was your inspiration for Perdido, and why did you choose Perdido as the name for this project?
Well, I completed Landstar was like 4-year project with Polaroid land camera. That's where the title came from. Kind of shooting roadside, vanishing roadside images. And I'd come to the end of that project, and I hadn't done anything in a couple of years, and I was thinking of what to do. And what happened was, I moved to New Orleans in 2005 from New York City to be closer to my mother because she was basically my North Star, my favorite person in the world. And she was not doing well. She told me in the fall of 2019 that she was dying. And I started thinking about where I came from, where I grew up, how my life was about to change, how this place that I knew was changing, and how my relationship to this place was about to change forever. So I thought about, I started taking some pictures of just like, first originally I was thinking I'll photograph kind of power centers in my life, places where important things had happened to me in my life. And so that's kind of started it going. And this was the fall of 2019. And this image here was taken on Christmas morning. Last couple of Christmases, my mom had 6 kids, so she had a big family. And so I would stay at this Holiday Inn Express, just to mainly have some space. And so I didn't know this was going to be my last Christmas day with my mom, but I made these 2 images because I could kind of feel it coming. And so I shot the one of the hotel, then just kind of, I don't know if the camera's on a tripod, if I had it sitting on the balcony railing, and then I took this other one of kind of the ocean. I think of it as a diptych. When we install this, the horizon line goes straight across the image. So I was very interested in the horizon line. So it's just a very iconic, important image to me, as far as memory, and that being kind of the start. I think it was one of the first ones I made in the series, or one of the ones I first liked.
Right.
And then the title Perdido comes from the Spanish word lost. And that's how I felt at the time. I felt lost.
Perfect.
In my life, like I said, my mom was my North Star. Somebody's always been there in your life. And then Perdido is also a place that's just west of Pensacola. It's called Perdido Bay and Perdido Key. And
Right.
it was a place that growing up, there was nothing out there. It was completely desolate, and it had turned into it had grown so rapidly that it had changed so much. So I just thought that it was a great metaphor for title for, the way I was feeling at that time.
Right. I know you also have, when we've talked earlier, you mentioned that this image of the uh, five flags in Pensacola was also another significant image that sort of was at the genesis of this project. Could you talk about this image a little bit for us?
Yeah, this is kind of a ghost image. I think of it as a ghost image because it was a ghost of a place that no longer existed. The only thing remaining were these palm trees that kind of ringed this hotel, which was a 1950s, 60s, 2-story cinder block, classic Florida hotel that was destroyed by Hurricane Ivan in 2004. The amazing thing is it's on prime real estate, right smack in the middle of Pensacola Beach, and no one's built on it yet. So, and I drive by it many times, and I just thought this was very iconic. The rule of thirds, the rule of fourths, the way that these palm trees divide the picture frame, and once again the horizon line is very important. The only thing you see remaining of the hotel is in the foreground, you can see a little bit of the parking lot. But it's just the Five Flags Motel was just an iconic place in my growing up. We would surf very close to that. And then we would come out of the water, we'd jump in the pool to clean off, wash off. And then also I used to work right next door to it. There used to be a Holiday Inn, not the same Holiday Inn I took the picture of, but another Holiday Inn that was destroyed by the same hurricane that I worked at during high school. So everybody knew the Five Flags Motel. I'd met people in New York who said they stayed at the Five Flags Motel when they'd go to Pensacola. And in the last iteration before the show went to the Do Good Fund, next to this photograph in the install, I found a postcard of the Five Flag Motel from the 50s or 60s, and I put it next to this image that I took. So it's kind of like a vanishing place. I think of Chris and Barry's photograph of the Palmist house. The last photograph no longer exists. So that's what I was thinking when I took this image.
Right. Excellent. Okay, so I know everybody has influences for projects, and I know that The Mangrove Coast was a book that was published in 1941. It included images by Walker Evans, and the book was about West Florida. How did the images of Walker Evans shape your image making, and what did you derive from the Mangrove Coast that influenced your Perdido project?
Well, first of all, the Mangrove Coast book isn't that well known. It actually came out 5 years before Marjorie Stone Douglas's The Everglades River of Glass book that was, credited for saving the Everglades from destruction and becoming a national park. But Beckel, it's an interesting story. He was the president of UPI United, which became, it was called United Press, it became UPI United Press International. He was a northern businessman who moved to Sarasota in the 1930s, and he wanted Sarasota to become this art center and tourist center. And so he wrote the history of the West Coast of Florida. And at that time, he brought down the most popular, probably the most famous photographer of the time, Walker Evans, to make photographs for this book. And what I like about the story and the book is great. It's about the geographical history of Florida, goes through the Seminole Indians and the Spanish conquistadors and Civil War and up to the present, which was 1930s. But what I like about the photographs of Walker Evans is they don't really relate to the text that much. And so I don't think Evans really liked Florida. And so he made these pictures. And after the first edition sold out, Carl Beckel edited out the Walker Evans photographs. So he edited out the photographs of the most famous photographer of the time. So what I liked about it is the photographs are just kind of a sad pictorial of Florida. And that's what I wanted to do with Perdido. I thought it was, I was in a sad state. The world was in a sad state. I just lost my mom. Then we had the pandemic. And so I wanted to make pictures that did not really reflect what people think of Florida. And when I read this book at the same time that I was doing the project, and so it was very influential. And there's also a book that the Getty put out called Walker Evans Florida. That's where you'll see a lot of these pictures, because unless you get a first edition of this book, you will not see the Walker Evans photographs. So I just thought it was very interesting that his photographs didn't jive with the narrative of the book. So they edited them out. So I wanted Perdido, the images, to not really jive with what people think of Florida, because what I think of Florida has changed so much. And, it was also a state of mind that I was in at the time.
Right. I know Walker Evans had his sad palm trees, and this next image is of your sad palm trees. So of all the images that you had to choose from, I know you used this image for your lo-fi projections. Why did you choose this image for that particular?
I just really liked it. And I guess the one thing I shot a lot of film at the time, and I posted that one on Instagram, and an artist I really love here in New Orleans liked it. And I was thinking, well, if she likes it, it must be okay. But go back to the original there.
Okay.
It's just, I don't know, these palm trees, they're just so, they're sad, you know, it's like
They
they're not
really
like
are.
happy clouds, like they're sad palm trees, and one of them's dead, and they've been wind blown. And this is another lot on Pensacola Beach that there used to be a hotel that they haven't built on yet, which I'm surprised. And you know, it's in black and white. It's just, I don't know, there's just something about it, just the way that the shapes and stuff. So I just thought it was a very, once again, when you think of tropical Florida, you think of palm trees, you think of color, you think of colors like turquoise, pink. And then so this is in black and white, shot with a rolly, very monochromatic. So I just like the feeling it had. I thought it was very kind of Southern Gothic. I just thought it created a nice mood. So you go to the next one. So then I used that image as one of the signature images. This is from the New Orleans Photo Alliance exhibition. I used it for a projection I did with overhead projectors. So when I was at Florida State University, I started incorporating like lo-fi projectors into my art making. And so this is basically a photographic print done on ortho film instead of, so you do it in the darkroom like you're making a photographic print on to paper, but instead you're printing on this ortho film, which the whites of the picture will come out clear. So I took that image, put it on an overhead projector, just like the ones, if you guys are over 50 years old, you'll remember them from high school.
Yeah,
They
absolutely.
used them in high school to, you know, to write on and project mathematical equations or something. So I used it to project, and it's the signature image, one of the signature images of my show, that one, and the and the Five Flags Hotel.
Flags and the Holiday Inn.
So anyway,
I have a question about, I know at the beginning of your project, Perdido, you were really taking a documentary approach. At what point in the project did you decide to take a more interdisciplinary approach to Perdido?
well, you know, I'd really like to be a photographer like you, Jimmy, and be a straight documentarian and have an exhibition with 100 silver gelatins printed 11 by 14 in a row, you know, but it just wasn't working out that way.
Right.
And some of it was financially. I couldn't go to Florida every, you know, 2 weeks to photograph, so I wasn't
Right.
photographing that well. But it's just something I've been doing for a long time. And you know, like I said, at graduate school at FSU, I did this kind of work and it got a lot of recognition. It's also a way of kind of setting my work apart from other photographers. I mean, in the Do Good Fund exhibition, there's 30 or so, you know, framed photographs, 2D, but in the other incarnations of the show, I've relied heavily on these kind of make do lo-fi projections, repurposing old, you know, antiquated equipment to make imagery. I'm very influenced by vernacular art, folk art, people who can just take a 2x4 and make art out of it. So I'm trying to do that with the most basic equipment to make imagery. So it's a way, you know, in a way, it's a way to set my work apart a little bit from what else is going on. So, and it was an act of desperation as well, because, you know, I didn't know if I could fill the gallery up with 200, you know, whatever it was going to take of straight photographs. And it's just something I'm very interested in. I'm interested in light. I'm interested in, you know, just in artists like Dan Flavin, James Turrell, people who just, you know, very minimalist work. So,
I know when I saw this in Pensacola, I was very taken with it. I love the size of it and the
well, it was
tonality.
even bigger in New Orleans. So,
Oh, really? Amazing. Yeah. Okay, so let's move on to some of your influences. I know you received your MFA in studio art from FSU and you did undergraduate work in film, but when you were at FSU, you studied under Robert Fichter, who was at the forefront of experimental photography as well as being a student of Jerry Uelsmann. How and to what extent did that association with Fichter influence your own body of work?
well, I think Fichter, for one, I learned alt process. You know, Robert Fichter was one of the first people to rediscover what we call now alt processes or 19th century processes. So he was doing that in the 60s. So he was part of that group. kind of anti F-64 club. There was a group up in Florida. Jerry Uelsman was one. Robert at Florida. Yvonne Streetman at University of Florida was another one who hired both Jerry and Robert Fichter. And then there was Robert Fichter at FSU. So those were the three. And I don't know what it was about Florida that kind of this kind of a hippie, alt process scene.
Right.
And so if you see the one on the right, Robert Fichter, Roast Beef, Weapons of War, both of these images, actually, he's collaging imagery. So he's taking, multiple images, collaging them to create one piece. And, I'm very interested in that, in the projections. And also, Jerry Uelsman was doing that. Of course, he was the master of it at University of Florida, where he would, use several enlargers to make one image,
Yeah, 7, in fact, is what he's used.
Yeah, yeah. So I think that was the biggest influence. They were very kind of, it wasn't so much about technique as it was imagery and aesthetics. And also Fichter became a painter, I don't, and they're not in this examples, but he would combine painting and photography, which is something, William Christenberry was more of a painter than he was a photographer, even though he was more famous as a photographer.
Yeah.
So in a painting and light-based installation is the way I'd like to move my own work, because photography is hard, as you know, Jimmy.
Yeah, I know.
You get tired of chasing light, so you can do
Absolutely.
these in the studio.
Yeah, and Fichter, I think his method was photo, paint, and form, and I think
Yeah, combining them all. So
right, you can see that in his work for sure. Okay, and so moving on, you have these two sprawl images from Perdido Key that you used a repurposed light box to display. Can you tell us a little bit why you chose a light box for these images over a print, for example?
Well, this was a happy accident, as they say it. Well, I was we called them Duratrans back in the day. It was a color process that you could print, and it was backlit. Jeff Wall uses them a lot. I did a lot of those in graduate school, but this is an ortho litho print, again, done in the dark room. And I had a bunch of light boxes, basically light tables that you would look at your slides in back in the day. And I was actually making these prints in the dark room, and I was just putting them on a light table just to look at them at density.
Oh,
And
how
I
interesting.
started overlaying them, and it was a happy accident. I was like, that looks kind of cool.
Yeah.
So, and I thought it really lent itself to the title Sprawl. So this is about Perdido Key now. I have to say this work is very much in the now. It was all made now in the last 3 years. There's no nostalgia about this work. I've heard people write about it that way. Please, it's not about that. There's an element of sentimentality, but this is modern. This is in the contemporary. This
Right.
is the real world we live in today. So let's get that out of everybody's mind right now. This is not about nostalgia. This is about the now. So these condominiums are just being built, and it's growing. It's not quite Miami Beach, but I remember it when there was nothing out there. So how do I come across visually like this idea of this place is just exploding? Well, I combine these images. The one on the left have 3 different images combined. The one on the right is the exact same image, but I just took one of them and I flipped it opposite. So that's the same picture, but basically a mirror image of itself. So, and I like the way it kind of morays in the middle, and that relates to the paintings. It relates to the Polaroid grid. So it works on a few different levels. And anyway, I just thought that you could have probably done this in the darkroom as a print, but I thought it worked better as a light box.
Yeah, and what I really like about these is that at first glance, you don't realize they're collages, but once you stand there and study them for a while, it really jumps out. Wow, he's meshed all this together. I think that's really just a very impressive work, Richard.
Thank you. It was a happy accident more than anything.
Yeah, well, we always like those.
But when you make art, you're leading down one road, right? You're leading down one path, and on that path you find other avenues, and you start going this way. And that's the beauty about it. You discover other things as you think you're heading for this one direction, and you end up going all these other ones, which is a good thing. So
So we'll move on. And so, you know, when you started this project, you were using your square format cameras, and and I've noticed you've got other formats that you've used as well. So just briefly, if you would just tell us what other formats you did use for Perdido.
I used, I think 7 cameras on this project. This is, if it's a rectangle, it's a Fuji 6.9. It's all film. It's all lens-based imagery, except the paintings. So this was a Fuji 6.9. The squares usually are, if they're black and white, they're usually a Rolly. Actually almost a 70-year-old Rolly, 2 1/4. If it's color and it's square, it's probably a Hasselblad. It's a Hasselblad. Just because I like the way that those just the lens is on those, and I think
Yeah, the Hasselblad's a lot sharper probably than your Rolly.
Yeah, the Hasselblad is. It's almost too sharp. In black and white, it's so contrasty. That's why I use the Rolly mainly. Well, this is a Fuji 6.9. Mark Steinmetz told me about this camera, and I finally, you know, after photographing for 50 years, realized that the aspect ratio of a 6.9 is so much better than a 6.7, but you live and learn. I use a Canon AE1 I have since the 80s for 35 millimeter, a couple Polaroids, a Polaroid land camera, and a Polaroid 600. So,
Wow.
And then a Fuji Instax camera. So yeah, I used a bunch of different cameras.
So now this Pensacola Beach sign was made during the COVID lockdown, and it's, you know, got that drape over the Pensacola Beach sign. Did you see this as a metaphor for something else when you made this image?
Yeah, it was a metaphor for a mask. Everybody was wearing masks then. This was during the pandemic, which was such a nightmare. And I think about that too, you know, losing my mom in January of 2020. And then we went directly into the pandemic and how that affected the grieving process and that whole dark time. But this was a sign that leads, if you know Pensacola, if you know Northwest Florida, you know this sign. It's iconic. It's been there since the 50s. And what it is, it's a sailfish. It's a very pop art looking neon sign that says it has an arrow that points to Pensacola.
I'll change to the next slide and we can look at it.
Okay. And this is what it is. It's this sign here that they had taken down. But the black and white image, that one was so indicative of the time and the fact that we were all wearing masks. Here you have this, you know, neon bright sign that's totally covered up with this tarp material that was so indicative of the way the whole world was at that time. We were all covered up. We weren't showing our masks. You know, the beach was closed or whatever. They closed a lot of things. And so they had taken the original sign, which is this picture here, and they had it on this flatbed truck, and it was parked in front of this triangular building. I just love that building behind it. So, you know, I photographed the sign, the kind of ghost sign covered up, and then this image on the flatbed truck. So I thought they were indicative of the times.
Yeah, I know when you first made these images, you made it in both black and white and color, and you ran a poll on Instagram asking people which one they preferred, and I'm assuming that color won the day.
Yeah, I like both of them, but I just figured that this one just it set it apart a little bit. So,
all right, and the next image is one of my favorite images in the entire show. The one you made of checkers. Of course, you know, I love black and white photography. It's, you know, just gorgeous. But when really what it does to me is it speaks to the decay in the inner cities, and particularly in the Florida Panhandle. And I just was curious, what's significant about this image to you?
well, for one, I don't know what's going on with checkers in Pensacola, but there's like 5 checkers and they've all closed down. So I don't know if that's happened across the country. And the other good thing about the checkers is they're very silvery, and they render very nicely with gelatin silver film and print. And I'm really proud of this image. I think I nailed it as far as compositionally, and it just kind of shows the decay of The thing about this whole Perdido project, I use architecture as a signifier for the human condition. So the new wealth of the city is on the beach. It's in the, the tourist dollars, the new wealth that's coming in the development. Whereas other parts of the city have not seen any of that development or money at all. So the division between the rich and poor is really stark there. And so this is on the west side of town, which is, it's funny. I have a friend that's, I've known him since the 80s, and he lives on the west side, and his name's Mike. And I was like, Mike, the west side hasn't changed much since, I knew you in the 80s. He's like, yeah, it has. He's like, it's gotten poorer. And I was like, you're right. And I go around, there's just all this, the economic failure of that place, and the homelessness and the meth problems and all that. It's really depressing. So this is, a metaphor for that part of the town. Now, when I photograph out on the beach, the condominiums and all that, that's the new infusion of wealth that's come there, the growth, the way that Florida is growing. Everybody that lives in Florida knows that it's just exploded.
Right.
And so you have that, and then you have the people that have been left behind. The same thing is happening in Appalachia, where the folks, they've grown up in the same town their whole lives, small town. Appalachia, same thing, Pensacola, working class folks, they're not reaping the growth that's coming there. So these people work for the people that come and build the new houses for the new folks. So it's a weird dichotomy that's happening all over America. So it's a microcosm in this place.
Yeah, and I think this really speaks to your idea about the dystopian paradise. This Polaroid dark slide with the message "Welcome to Paradise" to me is just so ironic, and I can only imagine that when it popped out of the camera, you took it as a sign from above. And
Yeah.
how did it contribute to you characterizing the Florida Panhandle?
Well,
Florida Panhandle as a dystopian paradise.
Well, when you shoot with the new Polaroid original film, which has actually gotten pretty good, the first dark slide spits out, and it's like a fortune cookie. It'll say something like, today is the first day of the rest of your life, or, whatever, something usually positive. And this one popped out and it said, welcome to paradise. And I couldn't believe it, because I think of, like you said, of Florida as the way I think of Florida, and growing up there as kind of a dystopian paradise. It's kind of been loved to death. I mean, I could talk for hours about this. And so I just thought it was ironic. When I usually install these, I have a row of these Polaroid original ones that I frame in the actual pack. I use the pack as the frame, and I just put them straight on the wall. But I'll start off the row with this "Welcome to Paradise" because I think it perfectly sums up how I feel about it. It's just a kind of a tongue-in-cheek joke of, yeah, welcome to paradise.
Yeah, I just think that's the greatest thing ever.
And then the one on the right is a condo and on Perdido Key, and the next ones, which is the Fuji FP 100C film, which is the peel apart film, another condominiums in Pensacola Beach. How do you make this architecture look interesting? I mean, actually, some of the buildings they're building now are pretty nice. For a while there, they look like brutalist architecture, like, Stalin built them or something, but they've gotten a little bit better. But, anyway, I started at the last of the Landstar project. Actually, it was over, but I had some film left, and I shot these condominiums on Pensacola Beach. So this is why I say this in the now. There's more pictures of current architecture in this project than there are old vernacular decayed Florida architecture, which is a signifier for the human condition and the economic well-being of a lot of folks in that place. I don't really photograph people. I don't take portraits of people that much. So architecture is my portraits. And you think of a facade. People say a facade of a building, which I think is, what is that, Spanish or Greek or Italian for face? So so.
And then, of course, it brings us to your Polaroids. you know, in your Polaroids, you address both you know, wealth and poverty.
Exactly.
And
The
in
one,
particular, you're talking about gentrification
yeah,
that's occurred, you know, all along the Gulf Coast from Perdido Key to Panama City, and you juxtaposition, you know, decaying buildings, strip clubs, condos. How do these images speak to the years you spent living in Panama City and Pensacola?
just, just the way it's stayed the same way it's changed, my relationship to it. That's one thing I should say, that I haven't lived there since 2000, since 1996, which I think is a good thing. But I go there a lot and I see it change. I think if I live there, I think you can be too close to your subject. So I think the distance of me being 3 hours away and only going there at the most every month. When my mom was alive, I'd go there about once every month. When I lived in New York, I'd go down there a couple times a year. And now I get over there about once every 3 months. But I think that distance really helps to really see it and not to be there. I think about William Christenbear and him living in Washington, D.C. for the last 40 years of his life and going down to Hell County and only photographing usually once a year. But, then you can dramatically see the change. It's not as incremental as you being there. So, but I see reminders of the past and I see things that I just can't believe have changed so much. I mean, the same thing, I go to Brooklyn now, the neighborhood I lived in Williamsburg, I don't recognize it from leaving there 19 years ago. It's mind blowing,
Right, change is the only
What,
thing that never changes.
well, the only constant is change. And, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. And I don't want it to be like I'm a fuddy-duddy curmudgeon about it, but it's a lot of the changes, I'm sorry, it's not for the good,
Right.
you know.
And here's another pairing I find really interesting. I love the Babes picture and paired with the condo. Talk about that a little bit, if you would.
Well, the condo, Pensacola Beach and Babes, where, there's a lot of strip clubs on the Florida coast. Kind of an interesting concept, but and you drive by. I don't go to these places, of course, but you drive by them at 5:30 on a Friday, and it's all pickup trucks. The construction workers getting off work, spending their weekly wages. They probably built the condo on the left, and then they go to the Babes and spend their money. So it's just, again, if the thing about the Babes one, if you go back, I don't photograph people, but there are two silhouettes of human beings on the side. So I do have these stand-ins for humans now and then on the pictures. Again, this is the west side of Pensacola.
Sorry, let me go back. There we go.
West side of Pensacola, ghost signs, abandoned gas station.
I'll go to the next slide. Oops. Yeah, and so here's I've seen both of these buildings. Tell me why you paired these two together.
Just a contrast. The condominium, of course, new architecture, and then the Mona Lisa Motel, which is actually is a masterpiece. It should be hanging at the Louvre. And the Mona Lisa is on old Spanish Trail, Highway 90, which was the old interstate that ran all the way from Jacksonville to Los Angeles, and it was replaced by I-10. So along 90, you have a lot of these old, like 50s, 40s hotel. The Mona Lisa, it still exists. I think it's a kind of a extended stay hotel now. They painted it up. It looks pretty nice.
Yeah,
But,
they painted it blue. It looks really good.
So yeah, I really like this picture, and it's become kind of a crowd pleaser. So,
of course, these images are about the kitsch that was once prevalent all along the Gulf Coast. And what does the demise of these kinds of places say to you about the changes that's occurring in the vernacular landscape?
well, the one on the left is Panama City, the Shark, and I hadn't been to Panama City in probably 30 years. And my first memory as a child was Panama City, actually. I was 4 years old playing in the Gulf of Mexico. And I hadn't been there forever. And I love shooting in winter, by the way. A lot of these are taken in winter because there's no tourists around. And so I drove to Panama City in October of 2023, and it was great because it was very desolate. And I came across this, I didn't know about this place, but it was called Shipwreck. I guess it was an old amusement park, and the shark was still there. And
Yeah, I think it was a putt-putt, part of a putt-putt golf course as
yeah,
well.
and they used to call it the Miracle Strip. It was
Right.
a little amusement park, and now it's changed a little bit. But I was just, and it had been abandoned. I just thought it was really visually interested, so I make this picture. And the one on the right is Hong Kong. It was a Chinese restaurant in Pensacola. I think I'd eaten there before. It's on the west side of Pensacola, and this is 2021. And there had been like a category 1 hurricane come through there. I forgot what it was called. You can see like one of the pagodas is kind of damaged a little bit. And it's on the west side of Pensacola, which is by the Navy base. So I thought it was interesting. There's all these like Asian restaurants on the west side of Pensacola, and they were built in the 50s and 60s. And I think they were built there because there was a Navy base there, and what was going on in the 60s and 70s was Vietnam War. So a lot of these guys had been to Asia, so it was kind of their niche was, exotic Asian food, and they happened to all be on the west coast of west part of Pensacola, which is the part of Pensacola that's really in decline. And I think the Hong Kong at this point had closed. It was the COVID, I think, closed it down, and then the hurricane didn't help. It no longer exists. They bulldozed it down, but I just thought it was interesting. It's kitschy because it was this cinder block building that they attached this like pagoda entrance to. So there's an element of humor in this work as well.
Absolutely. And here's, of course, the condo or architecture that you so fond of.
Yeah, so the one on the left, the Perdido Key made during the pandemic, that's the classic shot of, the way it looks now. Very straight photograph. I like the receding lines that kind of lead into the distance, shot with the Rolleiflex. One of the first ones I did. And the one on the right is Panama City. These are hotels.
I
2020
think that one's got some graffiti in it, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's a weird kind of we used to on Pensacola Beach, we call it the surf ghetto because we're all surfers. And I think about Dogtown and Z Boys, that thing about the skateboarders in California in the 70s. So
And then we'll go to
Freud, they had built it back, and so this is the west side of Pensacola as well.
Yeah, I love the pawn shop sign. When I first saw it, I didn't really, I thought it was a dog shop, but then when I actually got closer to it, I realized the end had just been blown off in a storm.
Yeah, the hurricane took it.
Yeah, really cool image. All right, so let's move on. And of course, these are the quintessential Panama City Highway 98 military town, Bambi's Dollhouse. Talk a little bit about these two images.
Well, once again, I hadn't been in Panama City in a long time, so I was kind of struck at there's a lot of more kind of funky small hotels still exist there than they do in Pensacola. They're basically all gone besides the Bambi, the Mona Lisa. So, but yeah, these are just struck me visually. I liked the way they looked. The light was really good that day. And the Star Motel I thought was a cool sign.
Yeah.
So yeah, I just shot them.
And of course, then we come to your color stories. I mean, and they're just in person, they're just absolutely gorgeous. The computer screen really doesn't do them justice. And I think when we were talking, you said you shot these in the winter when the light was soft. And so I'm really curious, at what point in your project did you feel compelled to create these grids, and why did you create these grids?
Well, I had the Polaroids in the Pensacola show. I had 3 galleries, and I kind of divided them by straight photographs, a Polaroid gallery, and then the projections and paintings. And I've been doing these for a while, and people either love them or they don't get them at all. But this is work that I can do in the studio. And like I said, I can't get over to Florida every day and photograph and produce, fill up 3 really big galleries. So There was an element of desperation, but I also love doing these. And I just think they're really colorful. The more I photograph and the more I think of myself as where I want to go with my art. I love people like James Turrell, Dan Flavin, minimalist artists. I had the most ultimate best compliment on this work by a woman who came to my show in New Orleans that said, "Oh, these remind me of James Turrell." And I was like, "Okay, I love you."
You've
Because
arrived.
he's my favorite. And that's what I'm looking at. It's just basically light. It's
Right.
using light to make images. And I love also pissing off photographers who say this isn't photography when it really is. It's made with the camera. It's made lens-based imagery. These are shot off the TV screen. And
Oh, wow.
so the one on the left, Color Study 36, I'm finally trying to make a more kind of based on other things. The one on the right is kind of just happenstance color, trying to make it, just play with relationships between colors. But the one on the left, Color Study 36, that one is based on the horizon line, standing on the beach and looking at the water of the Gulf of Mexico. So when you look at the water, the yellow represents kind of the shallow water where it appears yellow, and as the water gets deeper, it goes to green, to blue, to purple. So
Right.
that's actually made to kind of um, based on, an actual thing. So I've been doing that with them more recently. So, and I just love making them. I think they're very, they're just very peaceful. They're very different, and they do relate to the overall scheme. What I'm trying to do with this series is, once again, to use William Christenberry's as an example, is to base the work with not only photography, but installation and painting. So kind of having this idea of the sum of the parts, where all this work kind of relates to each other. It might seem very different to most people, but there is a thread that runs through all of it. So, and they're also Florida colors, so this is the happy-go-lucky, pictures that aren't in the straight photographs. So
Right, and that moves us to your paintings, and they're very architectural to me. And I was just curious, how did the Polaroid grids influence your concept of your painting?
yeah, that and the hard edge. These are hard edge paintings. I'm a hard edge minimalist painter. I love Richard Tuttle, Ellsworth Kelly, people like that. This painting was actually influenced by a pair of socks that I have that are that color. And you can also flip it over where the blue is on the bottom, and then it would be like the water again with the sun on top because
Right.
it's the hottest. And
Oh, that's
I
pretty cool.
just
I haven't
love the
seen that
way that
here.
the colors kind of transition from the blue to the red. They speak to the grids, Polaroid grids. And also it was from this painting that Richard Rodriguez, who's the exhibition designer at Pensacola Museum of Art, made the logo for the exhibition. So you can see the colors in the logo are based on this painting. So that's where the logo came from.
And here are a couple of more examples. And of course, I'm going to ask you this. I think I already know the answer, but when you painted that cone shape, did you intend to reference the lo-fi projections?
No, that came later. The people at Pensacola Museum of Art said, "Well, this relates to your projections." I was like, "Yeah, that's pretty cool. I didn't think of it that way." No, it was just once again a happy accident. I was just playing with shapes, and the one on the left was one of my favorite ones, and then the one on the right is very Ellsworth Kelly, very it looks like it's very much like the grid, so it speaks to the grids. I love painting. I do this for myself. I make all art for myself. I don't care if anybody else likes it. It's very
Yeah, the way it
soothing.
should be.
Yeah, it's very soothing. It's very contemplative. And I tell you what, it saved my life the time I was doing this because it got my mind off what was happening in the real world. And I really enjoyed doing it, and I want to keep doing it. And right now the show is going to, there's a next iteration. It's going to Institute 193 in Lexington, Kentucky. It's going to open in November. I'm making new work for it. I'm making some cyanotypes, which I haven't
Oh,
done in a long
neat.
time, which
Yeah.
is another, making photogram cyanotypes, which is another way of making imagery without the camera. So,
And so we come to our last frame of the evening, and
yay.
yeah, so it was an installation shot at the Do Good Fund, and Do you have any closing thoughts you want to share with us, Richard?
And I just want to thank you, Jimmy, for taking the time to do this. And I want to thank the Do Good Fund for exhibiting my art and supporting my art and supporting so many photographers that they've always supported. And I love the installation they did of this show. I hadn't seen it in person. They sent me these install shots, and this is the third venue that the Perdido has gone to, and everywhere it's gone, it's been a different incarnation. So it's really interesting how everybody's kind of interpreted the show. And so I'm really everywhere it goes, it changes a little bit, and I think it really adds to the narrative. So I'm just really happy with it. And when it goes to Institute 193, it's going to be very different as well. So, and hopefully some new work added to the project. So, but I appreciate it, Jimmy, and all the great questions. And thank you everybody who came and for the talk. And let's take some questions.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing your insights, Richard. It was a pleasure discussing your beautiful body of work with you. And I guess, Hallie, do we have any questions?
I don't see any, but I certainly want to encourage people to type their questions in the chat feature if you had anything you wanted to ask or contribute. I did have a question, Richard. I guess I was curious if you think you'll be doing more work on the Florida Gulf Coast.
Yes, I am. I'm a little shot out a little bit. That's one reason I kind of expanded it to Panama City and down a little bit, because I felt like I had mined Pensacola a lot. I kind of want to move on. I'm going to work a little bit more on it with the next show, and I think I'm done, to be honest with you. I thought about maybe I should add another element like portraiture or something, but it doesn't really speak to what, this is very personal. It's about family. So taking photographs of strangers on the beach or whatever, I think it's a little weird. So I just don't think it fits the narrative. So yeah, I kind of want to finish it up a little bit, tied up, and I'm making some more work that I think, but it's going more and more kind of the installation based and more ethereal and kind of metaphorical. So so that's where the rest of the project I think is going to go that way. And yeah, but I think I'm almost done.
That's a good feeling to have too. You can start. What are you anticipating your next body of work being, Richard?
Probably more just light-based installations, I think. Probably photo-based, but kind of deconstructing the photo process. I'm going to keep photographing, straight photography. We'll see where it goes, but I have no idea, Jimmy, and it's so expensive. Film photography is so expensive now, as everybody knows. I just don't go out and photograph, I got to have a reason to. I just don't, so it has to be, goal oriented. I just don't go out and take pictures. So I have to have a project. So I need to come up with the next one, but I'm going to continue shooting on this through the fall, probably through October, and then, have the work ready for the next show. And, so yeah, there should be some more straight photos. I'm going to go down to Panama City probably again. And I just sent off 6 rolls to Griffin. I'm supposed to get those soon and see how those came out. I've photographed over there in June and shot a bunch. And so, we'll see how those turned out. I might have some stuff to add to it.
We do have a couple questions. Betty Press asks, I wonder how you will approach the cyanotype images.
They're going to be photograms. So I did one this weekend, my first one with a palm, laid a palm branch down on, it turned out really well. I like the way it looks. So they're going to be photograms. I've got some other kind of Florida-esque things I'm going to put as photograms. I might end up doing some stencils. I might do some stuff based on some of the signs I've seen in the Northwest Florida. So they're all in my mind right now, and I bought all the materials. I'm going to start doing them soon. But I did a test run this weekend. I was really happy the way it turned out. I hadn't done them since graduate school in 1990, so that was fun.
There's another comment here from Karen Bullock. I feel like it's not really a question and maybe it's already been answered, but she just said she really enjoyed this and is always interested in how artists know when a work is complete. Then we have another question from Bill Yates. Richard, do you take all 7 cameras with you when you shoot?
Well, the William Eggleston's quote is, your best camera is the one you have in your hand. And what I do is probably not what photographers should do, because it gets confusing. But I sometimes feel, I usually have one with black and white, one with color is kind of what I do with the square, with the Hasselblad. Some things I just think would render themselves better in black and white than color. So that's kind of what I do. But that's a bad thing to do. But and then some of them, like if I'm doing a slide, I had some slide projections in the Pensacola show, so that's obviously going to be the 35 millimeter. If I think I want to blow them up really big, I'll use the 6.9, which I can make really large. But yeah, it's a bad thing, but I do carry not all 7, but maybe 4 with me, and it does get confusing. So.
All right. Oh, just more good comments about a great presentation.
Thank you, Melanie.
Yeah.
I love your work too, by the way. I follow you on Instagram and it's really beautiful. Or Melinda, I'm sorry.
All right. I guess that kind of wraps it up. Thanks, Jerry. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. If you know anyone who wasn't able to be here and wants to see this, we are recording it, and this will go up on the Do Good Fun YouTube channel. But thank you both, Jimmy and Richard, for a great discussion. This was really,
My pleasure.
really
My
a lot of
pleasure.
fun, really interesting.
Thank you.
All right. I will say good night.
Good night, everybody. Thanks for
Good
joining.
night. Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Richard. Thanks, Hallie.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye-bye.